All right, so I'd like to start this presentation by doing a little bit of a thought experiment with everyone. So take a moment and just think about what you think the day-to-day activities of a professor are. So you might think of things like teaching, research, committee work, service, outreach. But I want to think about this on a much deeper level, look at the minutia. What are the actual activities that you do? You write on a piece of paper to prepare for class. You write on a whiteboard or chalkboard when you're actually in class, right? Send emails by typing. Okay, so imagine the following situation. You're in your second year of tenure track at a school like, say, Harvey Mudd College, and all of a sudden you have to do these activities, but here's my challenge to you. You're not allowed to do any of the following. You're not allowed to write on a piece of paper, you're not allowed to type on a keyboard, and you're not allowed to write on chalkboards or whiteboards. How would you do this? Sounds like a real challenge. How would you feel about your confidence as an educator? How would you feel about your prospect for tenure? Well, I've been faced with this for the last 4 years, and it all started on September 9th, 2014. I was preparing for an algebra geometry class. It was 2 weeks into my second semester at Mudd, when all of a sudden I started feeling this hot and cold pain just to the right of my mid-spine, and a tingling that emanated to my fingertips. I was completely confused. I thought, am I gonna die? Am I having a heart attack? I don't really know what's going on. Right? So I proceeded to go to class and actually start writing on the chalkboard, and every single stroke hit me with an electrical pulse either through my arms or through my legs or from the tip of my tongue through my gastrointestinal tract. I was really worried. By the end of class, I was in a bucket of sweat. I went back to my office and said, okay, I just need to cool down, relax, take it easy, and do something relatively menial that's important, but will at least get me through my day. So I decided, let me check email. Every stroke of the keyboard hit me with this electrical pulse back. For the first few days, I was completely confused and didn't know what to do. But like having a sprained ankle that hurt a lot, I said, okay, the natural thing for me to do is go to a doctor, right? Okay. So I did that, and the doctor thought, hey, if the issues are in your gastrointestinal tract, maybe this could be a weird reaction caused by acid reflux. So he gave me some medicine and sent me on my merry way. The next 2 months were met with complete bewilderment. I didn't know what to do or how to cope. I'd walk into class and start writing, and within a minute, I'd be exhausted, so much pain. I'd say, okay, let me pause, stop, try again for a minute. Okay, no, I can't do that. Am I ambidextrous? I don't know, let's find out. This is a good time to find out. Right? Pause, do group activities out of necessity to rest. After class, I would go back to my office, lay there in a bucket of sweat, 1 to 2 hours of just tingling pain all over my body. It's been 4 years, and I feel continuous pinching pain throughout my body quite consistently. No matter what I do, physically, socially, scholastically, holistically, it's always at the forefront of my mind. And I think this is actually a common human experience that we share. Throughout our lives, at some point, there's an invisible struggle at the forefront of our minds above everything else. Sometimes it's a physical or mental ailment that obstructs us from living pain-free. Sometimes it's an insecurity buried deep within us. Sometimes it's the failing health or passing of someone who loves us. Or it could be coping with harm that was done to us in the past. And so today, I'd like to talk to you about this invisible struggle of mine that I've dealt with for the last 4 years. And 2 main themes emerge about how this fundamentally changed the way I interact with mathematics as an educator. The two things are this. One is I was completely forced to be very creative with teaching. And as a consequence, I found myself to be a much better teacher than I was in the past. And secondly, I have a completely renewed perspective on student struggle. Okay, so let's go back to this idea. So you're in your second year like I was, can't do these basic functions of your job, right? You're thinking, should I quit? Forget tenure, should I even make it through can I make it through the next 6 months? What am I gonna do? I feel this thing everywhere. I just wanted to scream, right? And I did often. But something had to happen, and I was just sort of confused as to what to even possibly do. And over the first year, I didn't really ask for a lot of help from people, right? Naturally, if you have this level of pain, you'd think you'd want to ask for help and hopefully get help from people to carry on with your job. I didn't really do that, right? And to really understand why, we need to look back at the invisible struggles that were at the forefront of my mind earlier in my life. So I want to take you back to when I was in high school. Oh, cute, yeah. Those are my parents. So my parents are both from Northeast Africa. My mom is from Egypt, her ancestry is Southern Egyptian, and my dad is Ethiopian. They met in Egypt, and I was born in Egypt. We moved to Canada when I was 4. It was a big sacrifice for my parents to move us to Canada, but they did it because they knew I wouldn't have much opportunity where we lived. So we moved with $99 in assets and 2 suitcases full of clothes as our complete ownership. I can imagine this being a really difficult time for my parents, and I really am indebted to them. But one thing I gotta tell you is that it was a real hard time for them integrating into the society, right? And one place where that became very clear, or time that became very clear, is when I was applying to college. So in my senior year of high school, right before my senior year of high school, I was speaking to my parents, and they said, okay, we have to have a discussion about the college application process. I said, yeah, sounds great. So they said something like this, you know you're going to university. And I said, yeah, I know I'm going to university. And we don't have the means to fund it, but you're a smart kid, you should be able to get some scholarships. I said, yeah, that sounds about right. And that was pretty much the first and last discussion we had about any administrative process involving college, right? More so, at this time, we had a somewhat tumultuous relationship. And at several points in my senior year, my parents almost threatened to kick me out of the house. So here I was, in my senior year of high school, figuring out the entire college application process, figuring out how to fund all of college, and on the brink of being kicked out possibly, so having to think about how to fund my life, right? You would think if something like this is happening to you, you would ask help from elders in your community, a guidance counselor. I didn't ask anyone. Why? Well, here's the thing you need to know. Think for a second about the following. This was my dad's experience as a senior in high school. He was surviving the 7th largest genocide in human history, walked through a jungle with his brothers for eight days, not knowing where he was going to be displaced, ended up in Djibouti, and had no idea where his life was going. So in my mind, complaining about applying to scholarships, funding college, and possibly having to fend for myself was not a thing I should do. But unfortunately, this caused the trigger of a personality trait that really did not serve me well, which was absolute self-reliance. And that came to bite me in college. So I went to the University of Waterloo, and there, in my 4th year of university, the first semester, I was taking 4 graduate classes and an elective. Graduate math classes. Okay, it's a lot. At the same time, my dad was diagnosed with a pelvic bone cancer on his right side. And I was about an hour and a half away from his hospital, so I used to drive there every Tuesday and spend the entire day with him. Right? In the middle of this process, he had to go undergo a surgery where they gutted the cancer out and replaced his pelvic bone. And it had about a 20% chance of fatality. I was a complete wreck at this time. My grades started plummeting. I took the GRE math subject test, it went badly. I would skip class. I would ask for extension upon extension on assignments, and none of my professors knew why. I didn't tell any of them a thing. Come to apply to graduate school, I asked for recommendation letters, naturally, and one of the professors told me later that he didn't write a good one. He thought I was a lazy student. And a big part of this is he had no idea what was going on. So what's the consequence of this? I applied to 9 PhD math programs, got into absolutely none of them. I decided to stay at Waterloo for the master's program, and that entire year, honestly, I felt pretty dejected, and I felt that I needed to change career paths. I really wanted to be a math professor at that point, but I just felt it wasn't the track I should be on, because I was in a cohort of a lot of really strong students who all went on to the PhD programs of their choice. Eventually, I made it through the master's program, and I went on to do my PhD at UC Davis, where I met Jesus de la Vera. And I think that's where a transformation started occurring. You see, I still had this absolute self-reliance attitude, and sometimes it was quite self-sabotaging like it was in the past. But he came in and reminded me. He said, you know what? I truly believe in you and your potential as a mathematician. And it wasn't something that was a platitude. I actually did really well in my undergrad. It was when this situation occurred in my life that things started to really spin off, right? And I really believed what he said. And as a consequence, I not only got my PhD in the math program at UC Davis, but I went on to win the Division of Physical and Mathematical Sciences award for outstanding thesis. After that, I went on to do a postdoc at Caltech, and now I'm a tenure-track professor at Harvey-Mudd. So here I was in my second year of being a tenure-track professor, not being able to do any of these things, having this freak-out response, right? And acting the same way I did in high school and in college. I wasn't changing, but I had to, because there was a difference this time. The consequences in high school and college were about my trajectory in my career. This was about my body and my life. I had to do something. I needed help. And help I got. And what I want to talk to you about is some of the creative things that came out of the help that I got, and go a little deeper into this in a little while. Okay, so one of the things that I thought about is really changing the media that I use to do teaching. So at Harvey-Mudd College, we have a GRE math subject test prep program that I've been involved with every year for the past several years. So the first time I was involved with this, I thought, I want to create resources that allow me to not use my hands at all, right? So I made these videos. You see me kind of writing, so you might be like, using your hands, right? But I only have to use my hands once when I create these videos. And later years, I would refer students to these videos to watch them. Now, where does the help come in? Well, first of all, I didn't come up with this idea myself. Dr. Candace Price, who's in the audience right now, and Dr. Amanda Reese at the University of San Diego were the ones who really pushed me to get this going along. Also, I'm kind of afraid of making videos. I mean, it kind of freaks me out to have something on YouTube that just any random person can watch, right? And I didn't really know how to even create them, and I didn't really know how YouTube worked from the perspective of the creator. But I went to our IT services on campus and asked how these things work, and they helped me out a lot. So moving on, I started to really use my voice to do mathematics and do my mathematical outreach, right? So I like the idea of maybe writing op-eds or working with popular press, right? But I don't like the idea of writing too much, right? So I can use my voice to do this, and people will help me out. The communications office at Harvey-Mudd was instrumental in getting me to talk about diversity in mathematical competitions in an article in Forbes. And I also got to talk about my favorite theorem, Burnside's lemma, in a Scientific American blog through a podcast format. I even wrote a book, available on Amazon. It's number theory toward RSA cryptography. So the idea with this book is I talk about number theory, and it's 10 long undergraduate lectures that culminate in explaining how RSA cryptography works. But in it, there's a lot of writing. So instead of having a theorem with a proof, right, there's a discussion on how you'd come up with the proof in the first place, then a proof is presented. Right? So it's in the eyes of the student, not the eyes of a presenter of mathematics. And most of the work that I did here was done, the writing process was done using Dragon Naturally Speaking, which is a software program that allows you to dictate and write. I even found ways to do a little bit of LaTeX with Dragon Naturally Speaking as well. Okay, great. So it sounds, so far this story sounds like the following. It sounds like horrible pain, got help, it's all good. No. If you think about this for a second, my entire life, it was very difficult for me to ask for the help that I needed. So don't think that when I was faced with this adversity, that I somehow magically knew how to ask for help when I needed it. I didn't. I needed to figure out how. And it wasn't a straight trajectory of how to ask for help at all. So it started with speaking to the then dean, Professor Jeff Groves, and Professor Lisette DePillis, who was the chair of our department at the time. You may have seen her give the plenary math bio talk yesterday, which was outstanding. Thank you very much. So I went to them and said, you know, it's really difficult for me to work with my hands. I need to do something. Can you help in any way? And they suggested two things. One is they suggested connecting with human resources and going through physical therapy and seeing if that might help at all. And also, Professor Lisette DePillis mentioned getting ergonomic software not only for my office space, but also for helping in the classroom. And that made a difference. But another thing you need to know is like the problems that I had were not just at work, they're also at home. At the beginning of this, it was really difficult for me to fold laundry, do dishes, make dinner. All of these caused massive shocks all over my body, right? I could not ask somebody to do dishes for me, cook my dinner, right? I can't even ask somebody to substitute a class sometimes. Like, how am I going to transfer to, please make my food? No, right? But sometimes, if you're in the right community, help comes to you, right? And that's what happened here. Professor Nora Youngs, who's now at Colby College, and Professor Ivan Ventura, who's now at Cal Poly Pomona, were both postdocs at Harvey Mudd at the time. And they would just show up at my house and be like, we're going to do these things for you, right? I'm indebted to them completely. So I had help at work and at home, but as the years went by, my symptoms sort of stayed the same. So I needed to go back and ask for more help. So I spoke to Professor Jeff Groves and Professor DePillis again, and we had this meeting in Jeff's office where we sat down, and I pretty much said the following: I need help. I don't know what to do. This is extremely, extremely painful, and I just don't have a solution. And I completely broke down in their office, sobbing tears like crazy. And eventually, after talking through this, we came up with an idea that really transformed not only my body, but the way that I perceive mathematics education. And the idea was for somebody else to be my hands, for the students to be my hands. So let me tell you a little bit about this. In my classes, I have a tablet at the front of the room, and I have a designated student who writes for me while I speak. So it's live dictation with a student who writes. I speak with the student usually beforehand to give him or her an idea of what we're going to be talking about that day, right? And sometimes they improv on the fly. Now, here's the thing with this. You know, at this conference, we talk a lot about creative teaching ideas, but one of the things that we don't break free from is a model in which there's one individual who has a bunch of knowledge transferred to a group of people that don't, right? Even in IBL, which usually breaks this model, there's still role that the teacher plays in trying to influence the direction. The difference with this is now there's an intermediary. These students usually already took the course, so they have the content knowledge, but on top of it, they can communicate with other students in ways that I can't, because I'm old, right? And I can speak with these students individually in ways that the students won't understand because they haven't taken the course already, right? On top of this, each of these students really changed their trajectory as a consequence of having this experience. Imagine you as a student sitting and getting to see the entire teaching process from a professor, from idea and incubation all the way to actual implementation in the classroom. Right? Jenny now is doing a mathematics education thesis, sort of based on what she learned here. Cha is on to a graduate program in mathematics at the University of Washington, where he's implementing some of the ideas in the courses that he's TAing. Same with Colin Okazaki, who's at the same school. And Shayan Akmal, who I worked with on various research projects, has really taken on this teacher-scholar model in the classes where he wrote for me, and particularly the ones that had a strong research focus. So what do I want you to take from all this? What's the take home here? It's really this which I write on this slide, and I want to read this verbatim because I think every single word here is really important. At many times in our lives, we're faced with invisible obstacles, dilemmas, and insecurities. Obstacles that people don't truly see or feel, but are constantly on our minds. In the midst of such adversity, it's vital that we seek help from our community. Not only will that fast forward us from coping to thriving, but it will spark a creativity within us we could have not possibly imagined. Thank you.